Good morning, Morai, V'Rabotai, Bruchim, Habayim. We are continuing on Masechet Succah, and we are on top of the Lamed Tet, Amud Aleph, the second line. Today's Amud is being learned as a Zchut Refuah Shelema for Michael ben Nahid, for Rachel Simcha bat Nahid, for Esther Bracha bat Chaya, that should all have, and also Rabbi Avraham ben Tajgol, that should all have Refuah Shelema Be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. This month's learning of the community has been graciously dedicated by the Shei family, Dayan family, Kohen families. Should be an ultimate zchut for all their mishpachot. Amen. So, V'amar Rava. Lo lema inish, we spoke about the fact at the end of the discussion yesterday that when you say Hallel, you should not say Baruch Haba and then go take a tour around the block and then say B'Shem Hashem, or for that matter, say Baruch Haba and take a deep breath and say B'Shem Hashem. You are making enough of a hefsek between the pasuk that it sounds like you're saying B'Shem Hashem separately, which would be mentioning Hashem's name in vain. So you shouldn't do that. And that, parenthetically, emphasizes the importance of diktuk. Sometimes certain things go together, certain things don't go together, and you many times see that even people who've been serving as a shaliach tzibur, as the chazan, for several years, they still are putting the commas in the wrong place, hence changing the meaning of the sentence or making the sentence meaningless, and so on and so forth. Again, this is one of those things that you have to learn the basics of a language. But here it is again stressing the importance of where you put the comma and pausing in the middle of the pasuk. And Rava says not only that, but even by saying Yeshem Rabba, Amen Yeshem, even though you're not the pasuk, it's not the bracha, but the Gemara says the world stands on answering Amen Yeshem Rabba. It is important, right? People look for sgulot, v'yarayam sgula. So the Gemara says, if you want real school, you have to go to what the Gemara says. Don't look at the things that have been pushed through in the past 30 years, 50 years. I'm not going to get into trouble if I give examples for it, but what the Gemara says for sure is something to emphasize. Gemara says even a person has 70 years of bad decree, chas v'shalom, you answer Amen Yeshem Rabba bekol kocho, which Rashi Tosafot bekol kavanato means you say it really meaning it, sanctifying HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name in the world, and saying it even actually loud, not mumbling it under your breath, but actually saying the words loud. The Gemara says, "Korin lo gezardin shel shivim shana." They rip apart the gezardin of a shivim shana, right? And the Gemara says the world stands on Amen Yeshem Rabba of Kaddish Darabanan. When you have Al Yisrael, it's super important, super important thing to answer Amen Yeshem Rabba. So therefore, perhaps because of that, Rava says when you're answering Amen Yeshem, you have to be very careful to say it properly, right? Amar Rava, lo lema inish Yeshem Rabba. Don't say Yeshem Rabba and then go to sleep and wake up afterwards. Ve'adar mevarach. Pause in the middle and then say mevarach. It has to be together. Yeshem Rabba mevarach. Right? It doesn't mean that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name, that is great, should be blessed in that way. Ela Yeshem Rabba mevarach. It has to be together. Behadade. Together in one breath. Amaleh, Rav Safra tells him, Moshe Shapir Ka'amrat. He calls him Moshe, like we explained yesterday that in all of Tanakh you don't find Moshe aside from Moshe Rabbeinu. Well, it's not a popular name, and not only that, in all of the Tanaim and Amoraim you don't find Moshe. There's no Rabbi Moshe, right? Until you get to the time of the Rishonim. But perhaps one of the reasons was because Moshe was a name that you had to earn. Right? The Gdolei Ador were called Moshe. Now, we have this concept of Moshe Rabbeinu being a neshama kolelet. He was a person that was equivalent of all of Klal Yisrael. He encompassed all the neshamot of Klal Yisrael. It was in the entirety of the Jewish nation was on one side, Moshe Rabbeinu was on the other side, and this was a name that came with a lot of achrayut. So you find that every person that was considered the Gadol Ador, he has some of Moshe Rabbeinu in him. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives a certain siyata dishmaya, a certain spark of Moshe Rabbeinu that is in every leadership of every generation. So perhaps that's why Moshe, every Gadol Ador, Rashi says this in Masechet Betzah, Rashi says this in Masechet Shabbat, Rashi says it over here, that the reference of Moshe was to a Gadol Ador. If you look at the first words of Rashi on the Amud, Moshe Gadol Ador. Right? That's how Rashi teaches the word Moshe. Moshe is a reference to the Gadol Ador. So he's surprisingly says, Moshe Shapir Kamrat. Oh, you think you're saying good? You know, such a surprise coming from you. You are the Gadol Ador. You're like Moshe Rabbeinu. You should not be making this mistake, right? So it's bitmiya, it's a question for him. Moshe Shapir Kamrat. You think this is correct? Ela hata ve'acha asukim miltahu. Both there and here, simply understood would mean both by Halel, Baruch haba b'shem Hashem, and over here, Amen Yehei Shem Rabba Mevarach. Asukim miltahu. You're finishing up the sentence. Now you stopped for a second in the middle. He also agrees that you should not be going around the block or do a big hefsek. That according to everyone is a problem. But you Kedei Neshima, you waited for catching your breath. That says Safra is fine. That's not a problem. Asuke miltahu ve'let lamba. He's finishing up his sentence. There's no problem with that. Now says the Gemara, Makom shenagu lichfol. We learned in the Mishnah that the nature of Halel is in such way that if you live in a place that have certain minhagim, you could follow the minhag. And we mentioned before that much of this minhagim have been changed in the course of the years. The very fact that nowadays we don't say the Asdis Faradim, the Moroccans, the Syrians don't say bracha on the minhag of saying Halel al Rosh Hashanah is perhaps something that has been changed in the past few decades, and much of the minhagim of the Ashkenazim and Sfaradim could be in their nuanced elements different. There's a lot of it has to do with minhagis. The time of the Gemara was like that. The Gemara says Rav went from a place to place, and he wanted to stop them when he saw that they wanted to say bracha, and then he realized that this is their minhag, and he said, okay, fine, let it be, because they could keep their minhag. So therefore, makom shenagu, if you have a place that their minhag is to repeat certain psukim of Halel, yichvol, you repeat it with them. There's no problem with repetition of psukim. Obviously, we have in Masechet Brachot that certain things you cannot repeat, right? If you say Shema Shema Mishatkin Oto, you can't say Shema twice, because that sounds like you're appeasing two different authorities over here. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, or Modim Modim. Right? If you say Modim twice, who are you thinking the second time? Like, it sounds pretty bad, right? Therefore, Mishatkin Oto, especially you have to remember always the timeline of the Gemara. The timeline of the Gemara was in the time that in the area of Bavel, the Zoroastrians were extremely powerful, dominant in many areas. Again, the old Persians, before Islam came and basically forced the religion upon the inhabitants of the land, the dominant religion was Zoroastrians, Zartoshtis, right? And they believed, like the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, to two different powers, right? They felt that a God that's all good cannot be doing anything bad, and therefore there must be two powers. It's like, you have a problem. Sometimes it's better mikushya lo metim. Sometimes it's better to suffer from a good question than a bad answer. Right? But oftentimes people opt for a bad answer because they don't want to live with the question. So they basically did this, and they would call it, in the language of the Gemara, hormiz va'uramiz, in the language that we had back in the old Farsi would be Ahriman and Ahura Mazda. Same thing as the Gemara says, Hormiz Ahuramiz, that actually in the old Persian, Satan is called Ahriman, because that became like the source of negative and evil in the world. So in that spirit, certainly, saying Modim Modim, who's like the second guy you're thanking over here. So that was obviously a big problem. But saying Psukim twice in the Hallel, it's nothing really big. So therefore, Makom Shenagu Lichfol, said the Mishnah Yichpol. Now let's take a look at some of the examples of this. Says the Gemara, Tanam, Rabbi Kofel Badvarim. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi would actually repeat some of the psukim. What would he do? He would do from Ana Hashem Moshiana and on, he would do it twice. Ana Hashem Moshiana, Ana Hashem Moshiana. Ana Hashem Moshiana, Ana Hashem, Baruch haba b'shem Hashem, Baruch haba b'shem Hashem. Go on. And says the Gemara, Rabbi Elazar ben Parta, Mosif Badivarim. He would add in repetition of things on top of what Rebbe would do. So Rebbe would do the repetition from Anas and Moshiana. Rabbi Parta would do more. Says the Gemara, my Mosif, what would he add? Which psukim in addition to Rebbe would he be repeating? Amar Abaye Mosif lichfor me'odecha ulmata. He would start like we do from Odecha ki alitali vatili lishua. From there on, he would do all of the psukim twice, right? So now you know where it comes from, right? It's tucked away in Masechet Succah, Daf Lametet Amud Aleph. Says the Gemara, Revarech Yevarech. We said the end of the Mishnah was that if your minhag is to say bracha on Hallel at the end, but that's how we translate it. We're going to see it in just a moment. That if you have a minhag of saying the bracha via Halelucha at the end of Hallel, Hazaku Baruch, that's the minhag, and you will say the bracha. So says the Gemara, Amar Abaye, Lo shanu ela la'acharav. This that we are discussing over here is only the bracha, the after bracha, the bracha at the end. Before Hallel, it's mitzvah to say bracha. Why? Because the Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Rav Yehuda, the legendary student of Shmuel, and Rav said in the name of Shmuel, Kol ha-mitzvot kulan. All of the mitzvot, even mitzvah de Rabbanan, which this would be. Now, Ramban perhaps holds maybe a Hallel. Some of the Hallels are considered a mitzvah d'oraita. Generally speaking, the Hallels are mitzvah de Rabbanan, right? So by even the mitzvah de Rabbanan, we'll say a bracha on. Right? Because hechan tzivanu, we say Asher kiteshanu b'mitzvotav etzivanu la'adlik ner Shabbat. That's for sure mitzvah d'Rabbanan, right? La'adlik ner Chanukah, for sure mitzvah d'Rabbanan, right? Chanukah didn't exist, right, in the time. Well, according to Ramban, maybe it did, but yeah, this is mitzvah d'Rabbanan. So how do you say Asher kiteshanu b'mitzvah? Because mitzvah lishmoa divrei chachamim, says the Gemara. Where does that come from? From Parashat Shoftim, Pasuk Yud Aleph, in the beginning of Parashat Shoftim. It says basically, Al pi Torah asher yirucha, v'al mishpat asher yomru lecha ta'aseh, lo tasur min hadavar asher yagidu lecha yaminu small. Do not deviate from whatever they tell you, left or right. And that gives you the concept of listening to, actually, according to Rambam, every time you transgress a D'Rabbanan, you have transgressed a Deoraita. Because it says in the Chumash, it says, Al pi Torah, I want you to listen, to do the Torah based on what they tell you. Based on what your Chachamim of your generation tell you, the Sanhedrin tell you, that's what I want you to do. Right? It's explicit pasuk in Parashat Shoftim in the beginning. Al pi Torah asher yirucha, based on the Torah that they would tell you, v'al mishpat asher yomru lecha ta'aseh, and the judgment that they would tell you, you shall do. Lo tasur, do not deviate. Mina davar asher yagidu lecha, from the words that they tell you, yaminu small, left or right. It's a pretty strong and clear pasuk, and hence Rambam says every time you transgress the Rabbanan, you really have transgressed simultaneously a deoraita as well, and that becomes the reason where we say asher kideshanu b'mitzvotav vetzivanu. Hechan tzivanu, where did he command you? He commanded you to listen to the Chachamim of the generation. So says the Gemara, Kol mitzvot, all of the mitzvot, mevarech alehen over la'asiyatan. You say the bracha on them over la'asiyatan, before you do them. Now, this is a very interesting language. If in Hebrew you wanted to say, you say the bracha before doing the mitzvah, how would you say it? Kodem asiyatan. Like, speak English. Like, speak Hebrew. Why do you have to say over la'asiyatan? Over usually means passing, right? So where do you get that over means before? Says the Gemara. Umay mashma dehai over lishna ta'akdumehu. Where do you find that the language, the verbiage over means before? Like you said the bracha beforehand. The Amar, says the Gemara, because the Gemara says, Amar Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Dichtiv vayarotz Achimas derech hakikar v'yavor et hakushi. Achimas ran derech hakikar through the field and he passed the Kushi. Now, what was this story? If you know the context of this story, it makes a whole lot more sense what the Gemara is trying to accomplish. When David HaMelech had to deal with the rebellion and the revolt of Avshalom, his own son, against him, Avshalom was a wayward child. He was a rebellious person. He was extremely, extremely smart, unbelievably charming, and charismatic. He was the best looking fellow in the entire Klal Yisrael. He was a Nazir Olam, with beautiful, thick, long hair, right? The pasuk gives the weight of the yearly trim that he had, more than getting to the ground, his hair, and it's unbelievable how much hair he had, this guy, right? He had the most beautiful face and hair and look, and he was charming, he was smart, and he had something against David HaMelech, right? He started going off from the moment that his sister was violated by Amnon, the story of Amnon and Tamar. Tamar was actually half-sister of Avshalom, from the same mother, not from the same father. Avshalom was the son of David HaMelech. Tamar was not the daughter of David HaMelech. Was an already existing child in the second marriage. And he killed, obviously, Amnon 2 years later. And he was cast away by David. And then after 3 years, he came back. And they had a quasi-relationship, but what he was doing throughout the years after that was planning a revolt. He successfully took the majority of the cabinet and the people on his side. He revolted, and he had the best of the advisors. He had the top advisor of David HaMelech on his side, which was Achitophel. David HaMelech was extremely petrified from having Achitophel on the other side, because Achitophel was the smartest man alive, right? To the degree that the pasuk says about Achitophel, this is unbelievable. Like, you can't even make this stuff up. The pasuk says about Achitophel, ve'atzat Achitophel asher ya'atz b'yamim hahem. The etzah, the advice, the counsel of Achitophel that he gave to people on that time was kashoel be'urim, was the equivalent of you asking the urim v'tumim, the chest plate of Kohen Gadol, and getting an answer directly from God. Can you imagine that? And David HaMelech was petrified. He actually tells his friend on the way, when he's running for his life, he says, go, I want you to go and just somehow mess with this Etzav Achitophel. I don't want my son to be listening to him. If he listens to him, I'm dead. Right? And that's exactly what happened, miraculously. Long story not for now, but he came, he took Yerushalayim, he conquered the majority of the sensitive areas of the government, including the palace of the king. David HaMelech ran barefoot with a few of his confidants for his life. Right? So then they reconvened. It happens to be that Avshalom did not listen to Achitophel. Achitophel told him, go tonight. Go tonight. If you go to right away after him, he's tired, he is weak, you could kill him tonight. And Min Hashamayim, the other advisor, told him, says, no, what are you talking about? Your father is a seasoned warrior. He is actually on a high alert right now. Do not go right now. You conquered the place, get your forces together, or reorganize and have a proper war, and you'll kill him. So he listened to the second one, and Achitophel, by the way, just to tell you how clear Achitophel was, the moment Achitophel saw that he's not listening to him, he went home, he wrote his sava'ah, and he hung himself. He knew clear and well that David was going to come back and kill him, so he said, I may as well just do it myself, which he was obviously correct about that. And when the actual war happened, they did not let David HaMelech, was too emotionally involved, and they didn't let him go to actual war. He was old also. David HaMelech warned them. He said, if you see the young boy, Nar he calls him, if you see my son, do not kill him. Please do not kill him. Right? He told them directly, do not kill him. I don't want him killed. And obviously, the one that found him was Yoav ben Tzruya, right? Yoav ben Tzruya was the head of the army. He was a tough person, an amazing warrior, and a ruthless leader. And when he was chasing after Avshalom was on a horse. The thing that he was the most proud of was his hair, and that brought him to his demise, because his hair got stuck in the branches of the tree, on the undergrowth of the jungle where he was being chased, and the horse went off from under him, and he stood hanging in balance in the middle of the air for Yoav ben Tzruya to come and catch him there. And he, of course, deviated from what David HaMelech had explicitly commanded him, and he pierced him many times and he killed him, right? Now, that's how he died. Now, someone has to say the news to David HaMelech, right? How do you say the news to David HaMelech? He has sent Achimaatz to go tell David HaMelech. David HaMelech would be very upset. When you see what happened afterwards, when David HaMelech actually heard what happened. But what happened in reality was people didn't know that David HaMelech doesn't want to know about this, right? So this guy, right, the Achimaatz, I misspoke. Achimaatz is not the one that he commanded. Yoav told this Cushi guy to go and tell it to David in a proper PC way. Achimaatz was very excited, so he ran on his own, and instead of going on the path, he went through the fields, right, as a shortcut, and he went and he told David HaMelech way before the Cushi got there, and he broke it to him, not in a problem. David HaMelech started crying, ripped all of his clothing, he started yelling, pulling his hair out. It was, it's the love of a father to his son, even that type of a son. It's unbelievable psukim, like something to really, really think about. Actually, Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, every time he would go to Masechet Yad Avshalom. Avshalom, in his lifetime, he made a monument to be remembered, still standing, right? Most people who have gone to Eretz Yisrael have not seen it, right? But you can see it, it's like a monument. Masechet Yad Avshalom, right? That's what he called it, still there, right? So you cry. Out of all the holy places, this is the one place that he cried. And one of his Talmidim asked him, he said, why? He said, because whenever I come here, I daven to Hashem and say, look, he was a ben soreru more, and look at the rahmanut, the boiling emotions that David HaMelech had for him. Like the Gemara says, he said Avshalom 7 times, 8 times, and he brought him out of Geinam, brought him to Gan Eden, right? Avshalom, beni, Avshalom, me. And he says, mi ten muti tachtech. I wish I would have died instead of you. So he says, can't you just deal with us like this, Hashem? We are the wayward son. That's what Reb Chaim Shmulevitz would say. It's a tremendously powerful thing. But nevertheless, this is such an important part of Tanakh that a long tangent on an Amud Yomi day, it's worth it. But Lemaaseh, it says, Achimaatz ran through the fields and vayavor et hakushi. What does that mean? That he got there before the Kushi, right? He passed him, which means not just the verbiage of passing, but what's important is that he was before him, right? So you see from here that the verbiage vayavor Over la'asiyatan means to do it beforehand. So kol brachot mevarech alehen over la'asiyatan. All the brachot, you say it before you do the mitzvah. Says the Gemara. Abaye said another source for this. Mehacha vehu over lifnehem by Yaakov Avinu. When he actually at the end is meeting up with Esav after 20 plus years, and he's sending all this thing in front, and then the two camps that he makes, his family to two camps, and he's going before them in time, before them in geographical setup. So he says, he went before them. So you see from here also that lifnehem means before, right? Not just geographical, but in time as well. And says the Gemara, ve'ibait ema, or I could tell you, mehacha, vayavor malkam lifnehem. This is talking about the time of Mashiach, that Melech HaMashiach is going to be in front of Klal Yisrael, ve'Hashem Berosham, and Hashem is going to be Berosham, and the Roshei Reshumot say that Hashem Berosham means the bracha, right? Vayavor malkam lifnehem, ve'Hashem Berosham. This is where you say the bracha, the name of Hashem, will be first before you do the bracha. Now, obviously, this becomes a tremendous platform for halachic rate bites of, the minhag of Hatlakat Nerot by Sephardim, like in one of the fights, the big fights of Chacham Obadia, that he felt the minhag that some people had or have for saying the bracha after lighting the candles. It's a minhag shel ta'ut, it's a mistake, because how in the world are you saying the bracha after you do the mitzvah? Kol ha-mitzvot mevarech alehem over aslam. Obviously, Chazal, the Gemara says, the only exception to this is Tevilat HaGer, Chutz Tevilat HaGer, because that is like a catch-22. The ger, before he dunks, he's not a yid, so he can't say a bracha shel kiddeshanu b'mitzvot. Kiddeshanu what? Right? He has done the brit milah, he has accepted the mitzvot, he's been learning for 55 years in RCC. You have had all of that, and now he wants to actually dunk in the mikveh, but he's still not, until the moment that he comes out of the water, he's not a yid, so he can't say brachas. That's the catch-22. So therefore, chutz mitfilat hager, that was instituted to begin with, to be said after the first dunk, before the second, and so on. But all the other brachot, you say the bracha beforehand, and this gets again into this whole rate of how do you justify netilat yadayim. Really, according to Maran Shulchan Aruch, Maran says you stand there with a cup of water to do netilat yadayim, you say your bracha, and then you start pouring the water, right? We don't do that. How is that possible? How is the candle lighting possible? That becomes fascinating, right? But not for this moment. And says the Mishnah, Halokeach lulav mechavero b'shvi. This is going to be an opening to a fantastic subject of how do you do the mitzvah of arba minim on Shvit. Now we deal with this in Chutz La'aretz even every 7 years. It has become a little bit easier nowadays that you have the California etrogim and the Moroccan etrogim and so on and so forth. It's a little bit easier, right? And you have the dairy lulavim of California and so on. So it's a little easier to deal with this, but this is an issue that you have to actually deal with. And as we'll see in the Gemara, much of these halachot are not known by people, and a lot of times we could be running into serious issues when it comes to both purchasing and also usage of the etrogim afterwards. Many people have the nice minhag of making this etrog into a liquor or into jam, and if you make enough liquor, hopefully, even if you're an alcoholic addict, you're not going to be finishing it all at once, and it's going to be staying there. You're going to be showing it to your great-grandchildren, and this is what I made 50 years ago, right? So that becomes a big problem, because if you have something of shvi'it, it has shat bi'ur. There's going to be a moment the clock ticks, and you have to get rid of it. Right? And that's by wine as well. Like, if you have, for instance, like a 2015 wine, I think it was, whatever, Shnat Shvi'it, before, there will be a shat biur, and sometimes you have them surface again in the market because they've been given out. And if they're Eretz Yisrael wines that were produced in Shvi'it, as we'll see what produced even means, is it when it starts growing, if it's when it ends its growth. But if it's considered perot Shvi'it, fruits of Shvi'it, then aside from the fact that they have kedusha, they also have shata biur. There will be a time that now you no longer could use them, and you have to just discard them and get rid of them. And if they're surfacing on shelves in the stores for 60% off, that 40% is not worth the money that you pay because it's not mutar to use them, right? So that would be something that we have to explore as we go. Now, what is Shvi'it? Obviously, we know Shvi'it is the sabbatical year, the 7th year. You cannot work the land on Shvi'it, right? There was 1 year in 7 that everyone would take a sabbatical, right? That's where it comes from, and they would go to Kolel, not to Cancun, right? Both start with the same pronunciation. They would go to Kolel, sit and learn for an entire year, right? So if you're not doing that, so make sure that 1/7 of your wake hours, at least, you're learning. Plus, they will learn also. Rambam writes in Perek Gimel of Hilchot Talmud Torah, he says, he explains how a person should be dividing his time to learn, right? He says, if he's a working man, he's about a bus, so he's only learning 9 hours a day, right? So he should do 3 hours this, 3 hours this, 3 hours. That's what Rambam says, right? That's the working man. One of my Rebbeim, he had tremendous personality, Tzvi Einstein, the Shlita. He told me that one of his friends once went to Makolet, to Eretz Yisrael, and he goes there, he's speaking to this fellow, and there's like an old Sephardi guy, he's like a Makolet, right? So he asks, what do you do? He says, I'm in Kolel. And says his eyes lit up. He's so excited. In Kolel, Ashrecha. Fortunate. And then he says, what do you learn? How many hours do you learn? He does a basic cheshbon. He says 8 hours. He says, 8 hours? He says, I learn 8 hours. You know, he would like daven 5 o'clock, quickly go home, put a thing in his mouth. 6 o'clock he would go to sleep. 12 o'clock midnight he would wake up, learn until 7 o'clock, 7 hours straight, and then he would daven at 7:15 minyan, and he'd go to work, and he would catch another hour ben gavra legavra in the middle of this. He was so disappointed with this call, guys. 8 hours, that's it. You know, that's the way that they used to look at it in generations past. But nevertheless, at least the sabbatical, you have to divide it between your years. That's how Klal Yisrael survived throughout the ages, by focusing, on learning, by the education of Torah, and that way that it has to be. But nevertheless, the preface to this Mishnah is that you cannot work on Shvit. You can't even guard your fruit. It has to be hefker, basically. You can't put the shomrim, you can't put guards to thing your land. It's open for people to come, take. You can also take. Now, you can't also do schora with perot shevit. You can't do a business with perot. That doesn't mean that you can't sell them, right? Selling one thing is not a big deal. But when you're doing already business, a whole geschäft and his whole thing, that becomes a problem. Like doing a schora with perot shevit, which becomes obviously an immediate question mark on the multi-million-dollar business of arba minim and etrog on Pesach. Many people, that is their parnasah for the year, right? And that becomes a question. How is that exactly possible? And we all know, we've heard the words of, this is otzar betin. What does that mean, right? It says on the kashrut of the etrogs on Shvi'it, on Shemitah year, it says, this is the kashrut of otzar betin. What does that mean, right? How does that fix anything? And how are we to understand this? These are things that we are, Bezrat Hashem, going to discuss and learn in the next year. Hazaku Baruch.